The sexual revolution has gone too far. It's time to fight back against transgenderism.
Well, this looks like a fun video to be working on. Yeah. I don't know who these guys are, but I recently saw a link to their video in one of my friend's Discord servers, and I was like, transgender ideology. Yeah, I think I might have something to say on that. So, without further ado, let's get into the video.
It's pretty crazy, but I can go to any liberal campus and claim that I'm a woman, and students would agree with me. But if I were to go to a campus with a banner saying God created them, male and female, and distribute flyers against the evils of transgenderism, I would get a pretty negative response.
Penn State! We are! Not straight! We are! Penn State! We are! Not straight! We are! Penn State! Equality for all! We want transgender people, equality for all! Make yourself so proud!
What can you say to these unhinged, screaming liberals? Well, I'm going to give you 10 reasons that totally debunk this transgender madness. Number 1, transgenderism is tyrannical.
In one sweeping diktat, the Obama administration ordered that all public schools allow members of one biological sex to use the showers, locker rooms, and restrooms of the opposite sex. In one fell swoop, the federal government imposed transgender bathrooms on all schools in the nation. And the states that opposed the measure were threatened with severe penalties, such as the loss of federal funding.
So, we're already off to a bad start with this number 1, biological sex. That already tells me that you're going to make the argument for sex, not gender. And then you're talking about how schools will get their funding cut if they don't allow trans students to use the bathrooms that they identify with. Yeah, that would be because it's called discrimination, my good sir. I mean, would you take issue if they said that Christians weren't having to use a specific bathroom just for Christians, regardless of what their gender is? You probably would. So, anyway, let's get on to
Number
the next
2,
point.
it fuels child abuse. Transgenderism is especially harmful to children. According to the American College of Pediatricians, conditioning children into believing that a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful is child abuse. Endorsing gender discordance as normal via public education and legal policies will confuse children and parents, leading more children to present themselves to gender clinics, where they will be given puberty-blocking drugs. This in turn virtually ensures that they will choose a lifetime of carcinogenic and otherwise toxic cross-sex hormones and likely consider unnecessary surgical mutilation of their healthy body parts as young adults.
Alright, so, first off, that source that they are citing, the American College of Pediatricians, yeah, I've looked it up. And, according to MediaBiasFactCheck.com, they are a questionable source at best. Reasoning is they are a hate group and they use poor sourcing. And they lean very much towards the right. Let's see here. The American College of Pediatricians is an advocacy group for pediatricians and other healthcare professions. Thanks, Kat. is an advocacy group of pediatricians and other healthcare professionals in the United States. The group was founded in 2002 by a group of pediatricians, including Joseph Zanga, a past president of the American Academy of Pediatricians, as a protest against the AAP's support for adoption by gay couples. The group's membership as of 2016 is estimated at 500 members, in contrast to the AAP's over 60,000 members. The organization's view on parenting is at odds with the position of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which holds that sexual orientation has no correlation with the ability to be a good parent and to raise healthy and well-adjusted children. The American College of Pediatricians has been described by Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group with a history of propagating damaging falsehoods about LGBT people. Yeah, so I would hardly call them a good source to cite for medical knowledge. And then they're talking about how puberty blockers are just being handed out. I found a study on it. And the study took place from 2004 to 2016. There will be a source cited in the description. Essentially what it's saying is that the average age of placement was 14 years old for receiving these implants that block puberty, and it was only if they were receiving it based on transgender related diagnoses. It went from 0 to 63. I'm not exactly sure when this particular medication became available, so for all I know, it didn't even exist in 2004. A lot of them were more likely to get them as they got older. The majority were white, non-Hispanic. The conclusion essentially was that the use of the implant is more likely to be used on those that were natal males. They were also more likely to be received at an older age. Transgender patients are more likely to be white when compared to larger cohort of patients being treated for the original reason that the medicine was developed. And the final conclusion was that there might be a potential racial disparity in access to medically appropriate transgender care. So this whole study wasn't about if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It was more just trying to study where the demographics lay for the transgender care. It's a very short summary that I'm reading through. I didn't read the full medical paper, but I will have a link to the short version in the description, and you can always then look up the full study from there.
Number 3, it contradicts biology and science.
Gender ideology contradicts basic biology. It's incredible. The same progressive movement that once worshipped at the secular altar of science, to the exclusion of God and metaphysics, has turned against its own science is everything dogma. Now, all scientific evidence that disproves the transgender narrative is discarded.
Again, the American College of Pediatricians is clear. Human sexuality is an objective biological binary trait. XY and XX are genetic markers of health, not genetic markers of a disorder. The norm for human design is to be conceived either male or female. Human sexuality is binary by design, with the obvious purpose being the reproduction and flourishing of our species. This principle is self-evident.
Alright, so the next thing that they were talking about was how the American College of Pediatricians, or whatever, the hate group disguising itself as a group of doctors, is talking about how damaging it is for children to be introduced to the transgender stuff and taking cross-sex hormones and all this other stuff. The thing is, okay, their own source, the American College of Pediatricians, from the same place as the stuff that they're quoting, says no one is born with a gender. Everyone is born with a biological sex. Gender, an awareness and sense of oneself as male or female, is a sociological and psychological concept, not an objective biological one. The case is being made by the transgender community that they identify as another gender, not as another sex. So, there's that. And if we're going to go into biological sex as a thing, what about intersex? If there's only two sexes, what about intersex? For those that don't know, intersex is a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit into the typical definitions of female or male. Sometimes they're assigned a sex at birth through surgery. And this can be the result of any number of things, everything from maybe they have an extra chromosome, or they're born with two Y chromosomes instead of two X's, or an X and a Y. There's a lot of factors that feed into it, but saying that there is only two biological sexes just isn't true at all. So, let's get back to the
Number 4.
video.
Biological sex cannot change.
Those who embrace the transgender ideology pretend that men can morph into women or that women can morph into men, but their claim is false.
It is physiologically impossible to change a person's sex, since the sex of each individual is encoded in the genes. XX if female, XY if male. Surgery can only create the appearance of the other sex, explains Dr. Richard P. Fitzgibbons, MD, Philip M. Sutton, PhD, and Dale O'Leary in a well-documented study.
Every single cell in our body is stamped with our biological sex, and nothing can change that reality.
Okay, so I tried to find this well-documented study that they talk about, and I went to the blog version of their video and clicked their link. It went nowhere. I couldn't find the study anywhere. So, because I can't find the study, I'm going to have to look at the sources for the study. Richard P. is apparently a marriage therapist. He's pretty much hardly qualified to make a ruling on child health. Philip, the other one, he's also a family counselor. And Dale O'Leary is an author whose all of her work has been anti-feminist, anti-GSRM, and anti-trans. And she has no professional credits at all to show that she would be anything important on ruling on these things. The physicians, they're physicians and counselors, and they're all conservative Christians. I've looked them up their information. Links for those sources will also be in the description, as usual. But what it comes down to is they're not a good source to cite. And if their study is no longer available, obviously other people knew this, and so their study was taken down.
Number 5, it warps manhood and womanhood.
It's bizarre, but transgender ideology claims that biological reality does not determine one's sex. Feelings do. Therefore, the differences between male and female, much like the clothing we wear, are separate from our identity and are constantly in flux. Manhood and womanhood are just labels.
Feminist ideologue, lesbian, and writer Simone de Beauvoir affirmed that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. The whole point of feminism is not so much to eliminate the so-called oppressive male class, but to abolish every difference between the sexes. Here we see how the homosexual, transgender, and feminist movements are allied. They share the same final goal, the destruction of male and female, manhood and womanhood.
All right. No sources to support these claims? Let's just move on then.
Number 6, it destroys reason.
Part of logic and reason is the idea that things do have a purpose. The purpose of our eyes is to allow us to see. The wings of a bald eagle, for example, provide it with flight. Our lungs exist in order to let us breathe and absorb oxygen, and our ears give us hearing. Likewise, the primary purpose of human sexuality is procreation. However, transgenderism, like homosexuality and feminism, deny this principle, and therefore attack human reason itself. But to attack human reason itself is really a form of deliberate madness. It's crazy.
All right. So next we've got everything has a purpose. Okay. I can kind of get behind that. But then we get the question of, what about vestigial organs? We've got numerous vestigial organs and structures in our body. Everything from our sinuses to our wisdom teeth, our appendix, our coccyx. For those who don't know what that is, that's your tailbone. But yeah, I'll put a link down in the description with a source that can show at least 10 vestigial organs, structures, behaviors, things that we no longer need since we are no longer older species. So.
Number 7, transgenderism is self-destructive.
The homosexual movement shatters lives. Regret, despair, and suicide are common among those who adopt the T of the LGBT lifestyle.
Walt Heyer, a man who regrets having lived like a woman for many years, said, "I knew I wasn't a real woman. No matter what my identification document said, it was obviously a masquerade." Transgenders not only annihilate their birth identity, they destroy everyone and everything in their wake: family, wife, children, brothers or sisters, and career. Certainly, this demonstrates the behavior of someone hell-bent on total self-destruction and self-harm.
I practically put my head through my desk at this part. I'm sorry, it's just so dumb. So yes, suicide rates are higher in trans individuals. You know why? Because people don't accept them. Even if people were more accepting, you imagine every day of your life being in a body that you feel isn't yours and having to put up with that? Like, obviously you can't, otherwise you would be willing to be more accepting of transgenders. But yeah, if I told you every day that you shouldn't exist, that no one believes what you're saying, you know, like that you aren't a person, wouldn't you have a higher suicide rate as well? And then we get a quote from the anti-transgender movements. Greatest tool. Walt Heyer. Okay. Guys, Walt Heyer is possibly the worst example of a trans person. I don't know if any of you guys have looked into this guy at all or anything, but his records show, as well as his own book, show that he did not follow the proper procedure that one goes through to transition. He decided that he was a woman, and instead of going through all the steps like everybody else does, he went and forced a doctor to give him the surgery that would turn him into a woman. He skipped everything and went straight to the end goal. Maybe if he would have followed the proper steps for transitioning, he would have realized well before he got the surgery that he was not going to be a woman and that he did not want to be a woman. It's just, Anyway, let's move on to the next part.
Number 8. Where will transgenderism lead us? Trans species?
If a man could pretend to be a woman, why can't he also pretend to be non-human? Well, such a relativistic conclusion is regretfully already here. It's called trans species. It's also known as furries or otherkins. People with species identity disorder consider themselves non-human and are also featured at homosexual parades.
When feelings replace reality, logic dies. The intellect, the highest part of man, is degraded. Man's animal side rules. And our godless culture pressures us to play along with these depraved fantasies. Once these disorders are regarded as normal, what can possibly prevent the unbridled passions from introducing greater forms of depravity?
Okay, trans species. I'm fine with people who want to be trans species. Furries are not trans species. Furries are people that like to dress up like furry characters, like you find in TV shows, comic books, kids' cartoons. Occasionally there are some people that sexualize it, and some furries are also other things like otherkins and such. But not all furries think they're supposed to be an animal. Otherkins, on the other hand, almost universally believe they are something else. That is the whole point in the name otherkin. And the reason why there are furries and such at most GSRM related events is because the GSRM community is generally more accepting of people. So you know what? Furries are accepted there. Otherkin are accepted there. Maybe if you guys stopped spouting hate so much, maybe you'd be able to get some Christian furries. Or some Christian otherkin. Anyway, let's get on
Number
to the
9.
next piece.
Transgender ideology and religious persecution.
The transgender ideology may spark the worst type of religious persecution because it imposes a perversion of the mind, beginning with small children. Those who oppose it are targeted by this new religion of equality, which obliges children to attend sensitivity training and gender indoctrination. Indeed, those who cheer the homosexual movement, whether they like it or not, are de facto servants of a new religion. Its doctrine, transgender ideology. Its false god, radical equality and reckless liberalism. Its ministers, leaders of the homosexual movement. And its acolytes, liberal media, immoral politicians, and sadly, dissident members of the clergy. What is its inquisition? Anti-discrimination laws that threaten order and peace. Its excommunication, anyone who speaks the truth is labeled a homophobe or even a transphobe.
More Christians calling things religions that aren't religions. So, according to allaboutreligion.org, the definition of religion is not easy to find. There are many interpretations of what defines a religion, but not one that can be said to be the most accurate. Some of them are a strong belief in a supernatural power or powers that control human destiny, an institution to express belief in divine power, a belief concerning the supernatural, sacred, or divine, and the practices and institutions associated with such belief, and the sum total of answers given to explain humankind's relationship with the universe. In dictionaries, religion is defined as any specific system of belief, worship, or conduct that prescribes certain responses to the existence or non-existence and character of God. Also, a set of attitudes, beliefs, and practices pertaining to supernatural power. The problem lies when the definition includes a deity or superhuman power. For example, atheism is called a religion, but the belief denies any power other than man. Other religious definitions are so broad as to include cosmology and ecology, which most people regard as scientific studies and non-religious in nature. So, the problem comes in that they're trying to equate equality to a very broad definition of religion. It's not. It's not. Equality is the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. That, if anything, is a political stance, not a religious stance. But, as usual, far-right Christianity and their everything else is a religion because you believe in it.
Number 10. It offends God. The desire to change one's biological sex not only denies reality, but it also offends God. Nobody is born male or female by chance, but in accordance with the plan of divine providence. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you. A prophet to the nations, I appointed you. God created male and female. Therefore, to intentionally contradict the biological nature of mankind is an act of revolt against our Creator. Charity calls us to help those afflicted or confused about their own sex, not to increase their confusion by offering them a false solution. Charity does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Therefore, mercy can never stand in opposition to the truth, for only the truth can set you free.
You know, I've been hearing the argument that God hates trans people before I was even identifying as trans. And that was almost 15 years ago. So, I'm really tired of that argument, but for the sake of finishing out the video, let's go over what they have to say. So, they start with Genesis 1:27, but for some reason they only pull one line from it. Genesis 1:27, according to the New International Version of the Bible, reads, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." So, how that reads to me is that he created mankind in his image first, then decided to go between male and female. But as anybody who has actually read the Bible knows, Genesis 1 is kind of like a poem about the beginning of the universe, according to Judeo-Christian religions. Because then they go into Genesis 2 and do it all over again, but in different orders and change up the story. So Genesis 1, I wouldn't really count it as something that you can quote like that. And then they were talking about how we should help people who have issues like this. My answer is that's what we have therapists for. There are therapists out there who specialize in this issue. That is their job. They help people with this issue. That's how we wind up getting things like hormones and such. Because if you do the proper methods, you wind up with finding out whether or not you actually are the gender that you're identifying as. Because the way it works is, you go to counseling. Your counselor determines whether or not they think you have gender dysphoria. Then they will have you start to live as the other gender. While you are living as that other gender, you will do that for about a year, possibly more. After they determine that it is a good time, they will then start you on hormones. So that way you can start to get your body chemistry more in line with the gender you identify as. While you do that for a couple years, and eventually, if they think that you are ready and you think that you are ready, then they will do a surgical option. They don't just take people who have gender dysphoria or think they have gender dysphoria and take them to a frickin' surgeon, chop their genitals off and swap them out. We're not Mr. Potato Heads. There's a lot more that goes into feelings than just feeling. Then they're talking about how charity, it does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. But notice how the charity in their video is not inside the quotations? Yeah, that's because what does belong at the beginning of that quote is love, not charity. 1 Corinthians 13, 6 through 7 reads, "Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres." So they cut out the whole second part of that statement. And then they also changed the first word of the quote to fit their narrative. I'd like to say I'm surprised, but I'm really not. And then they hit us with another quote. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I hear this quote stated a lot. Now, this quote, John 32, or John 8:32. Okay? This is from a spot in the Bible where Jesus is talking to people at the Mount of Olives. And he has several disputes. This quote comes from the dispute over whose children Jesus' opponents are. And the part where it comes from reads as follows. To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So, what he tells them is that if they're his disciples and they hold to his teachings, then they will know the truth, and the truth will set them free. I know I just pretty much reworded the quote. What it comes down to is he's saying if you follow what he says, then you will know the truth, because what he's saying is the truth, is what he's saying. So, considering a lot of Jesus's lessons are about being kind to your neighbor and being nice to other people and helping out those around you, if you're following his teachings, you're not going to tell somebody that they shouldn't exist. That's not what Jesus taught. And by taking his quote out of context, you're trying to say that gender is not a thing, but natal sex is, and you must stick to the truth of natal sex. The last part of this video is just some quote about Saint Michael the Archangel, but I could not find the quote. Like, when I went and looked it up, it didn't read that way where I found it. It still read like that. It read the same way in a manner of speaking, but I can't find what it's in reference to or anything. All it says is exactly what they say, for the most part, and I feel like it's probably taken out of context, but there's nothing I can find context-wise to help me figure that out. So, I'm just not even going to put that clip on the end of this video. If you guys enjoyed my video, please feel free to support me on Patreon, like and subscribe, check out all the links in the description. I did my best to cite all of my sources so that way you guys could easily see what I was talking about. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!